Hello, my name's Edward and today we'll be looking at some IELTS speaking questions on the family. We're going to take a look through parts 1, 2 and 3 and hopefully give you some ideas for how to answer the question, what kind of vocabulary to use and some useful expressions to impress the examiner. So, we will begin with part 1. So here are some examples of typical part 1 questions on the family. First of all, do you have a large or small family? So it's a fairly simple, straightforward question. However, that doesn't mean you need to give a short, unimpressive answer. It would be possible to answer this question by saying, it's large, or I have a large family, or it's quite small. But this is very short and won't really impress the examiner, and it doesn't show your range of vocabulary and ability. So, even with a short, simple question like this, try to give a bit of detail, a bit of extra information. For example, do you have a large or a small family? Well, my family is fairly small. It's just me and my mum. Or you might say, actually, my family is quite large. There's me, my parents, and I've got 4 brothers and sisters. So give the examiner a bit more detail, show off some of your ability. Similarly, if we look at the second question, how much time do you spend with your family? It would be very easy to simply say, I spend quite a lot of time with them, or not much time. But again, these are quite short and not very advanced. So extend your answer. Think about extra information you can give, time phrases you can provide. For example, how much time do you spend with your family? Well, these days I don't get to spend as much time as I'd like. I only see them at the weekends. Or, how much time do you spend with your family? Well, luckily at the moment I have lots of free time, so I spend every evening and some of the weekend with my family. Okay, so last question. What do you enjoy doing with your family? You can probably guess a good way to answer it might be something like, well, we enjoy lots of activities. I cook with my mum, I play games with my dad, and we all enjoy watching dramas together at the weekend. So think of a few different activities. It helps you show your range. It helps show the examiner that you've got some ideas and that you're good and enthusiastic about communicating. Okay, so we'll leave part 1 there and take a look at part 2, which is going to be a bit trickier. Here's the question for part 2. Describe someone in your family who you like. You should say how this person is related to you, what this person looks like, what kind of person he or she is, and explain why you like this person. So first things first, be very careful in part 2 that you are reading the question carefully. One particularly common mistake for part 2 is that people will sometimes talk about many things, or many people, or many places, but the question in part 2 is always about one thing. Describe someone. That means one person, only your mother, or only your brother, or only your sister, not all of them. So make sure you're focusing on just the one person. Of course, you also need to be careful that you answer all parts of the question. So in the following sample answer, we will tackle each part of the question in a separate paragraph. So, first part of the question, how this person is related to you. Here's the beginning of our answer. So I've said, I don't have a very large or close family, so I'm going to talk about my mum. Her name is Melinda, and although she's divorced from my father, she's kept the same surname as me. Right. So, if you're talking about family, as always, you want some good expressions and collocations connected with this topic. For an example here, we've got close family. We've got the expression divorced from my father. Again, be careful with prepositions. We've got a bit more vocabulary about the family, so mum and surname. I've also been careful to include all the main information. So the name is important. It might seem obvious, but sometimes people forget the most basic information, like giving the name. So that's our first part of the question. How is this person related to you? Now we'll move on to the second part of the question on what they look like. So physical appearance. So this is a good opportunity for you to use different descriptions and adjectives of physical appearance. You may want to do some extra revision or dictionary work to enhance your range of vocabulary. So let's take a look at my answer. I've said she's fairly petite. Like me, she's slim and has a slight build. So some of these words, petite is small, and it always describes a woman. So it's a nice way of saying a small woman. Like me, she's slim. So think about body size and shape. Slim, skinny, fat, enormous, and has a slight build. So again, this describes the body shape. My build is fairly slight or average. A heavy build is more muscular and strong. She has dark brown hair, which is going grey, so she dyes it. She colours it artificially. So think about typical features like hair colour, eye colour, skin colour. You can talk about hair length. There's plenty of different aspects of physical appearance that you can talk about. I'm told we look very much alike, especially the eyes and nose. Although she's getting on for 60, she doesn't look it. So you might want to mention if you have a similar physical appearance to your family member. I've also mentioned the age. Be careful with age expressions. Make sure you're giving them in the correct form. An example here, she's getting on for 60. This means she's approaching 60 years old. She's nearly 60. But she doesn't look it. So she looks younger than 60. Okay, moving on. So the next part of the question was what this person is like, what kind of person they are. So we're talking more about personality now. Again, an excellent opportunity to give some vocabulary connected with personality, hobbies and interests. So I've said, my mum is still very active. There's our first adjective. She goes rambling, gets involved with local history groups, and still travels. This month she jetted out to visit me in Korea. So rambling. Rambling is like hiking or country walking. She jetted out to visit me is she flew out by aeroplane. So I've mentioned a bit about her personality, her interests, the kind of person she is. She maintains a strong interest in art and culture and has inherited her father's habit of spending far too long examining and pondering every single thing of interest that she comes across. So here I've added a humorous detail, a more funny aspect of my mum, which is that she tends to look at things for a long time. Even quite ordinary things like a flower or a picture, she'll examine them, she'll look at them as if it's something amazing and strange. So remember, funny details or humorous aspects of a person are good to mention. Firstly, they're entertaining for the examiner. They also tend to be more specific, so you can use some more interesting vocabulary, like inherited, examining and pondering, every single thing of interest. So, last part of the question, was why do you like this person? Why do you like them? So again, you've got some good vocabulary possibilities with personality and their general positive qualities. I've said, obviously, I like her because she is my mum, but principally, mainly, because she has always been so kind, generous, and patient. So a good opportunity for adjectives. I think it might also be a good idea to explain these in a bit more detail, perhaps with an example. So, why is she kind, or how is she kind? You might say she's been so kind because she always drove me everywhere when I was at school, or she always helped me with my homework. How is she generous? For example, she supported me at university, she's given me a lot of her time. I continue. It is a debt I can never repay. Well, this is a good one if you're talking about your parents. A debt I can never repay means you owe them a huge amount for everything they've done for you, whether that's money they've given you or time they've spent on you. She has supported me throughout school, university, and my travels, despite the extra burden of being a single parent. I respect her for that, and I feel a huge sense of gratitude. Again, if you're talking about parents or grandparents, you may well find these expressions useful about respect, gratitude. So, I've been careful to answer each part of the question in order, one paragraph per question. And I've had an excellent opportunity to use a range of vocabulary to describe people, both physical and personality, and interests as well. So, we'll move on to part 3. Now, part 3 questions, you probably know, tend to be a bit more complicated, they're a bit more challenging, and you're expected to give longer answers than you did for part 1. So, these are all connected with family, and in particular with family similarity. So, first question for part 3, in what ways can people in a family be similar to each other? So, possible similarities in a family. Let's see what ideas I had. I said, for a start, there's physical resemblance. So, one difficulty when you have a part 3 question, you've got certain keywords, like similar. Now, if possible, you don't want to be repeating these same keywords throughout your answer. You don't want to be repeating similar, 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 because this doesn't show your range of vocabulary. If possible, you want to use some alternative vocabulary and synonyms. So, for example, I've used physical resemblance. Resemblance meaning similarity, sameness. People tend to inherit their parents' or grandparents' characteristics. Things like hair colour, build, and distinguishing features like big ears or a Roman nose. So if we're talking about family resemblances, inherit is a good word. Inherit means to get something from your parents or grandparents. So you can inherit physical features, you can inherit genes or diseases, you can also inherit money and possessions. Also, if we're talking about people's similarities, we can talk about their aspects in different language, such as the word characteristics. Characteristics can be both physical, like my blue eyes and Roman nose. They can be personality characteristics, like anger or jealousy. So I've mentioned physical characteristics first, then I've moved on to personality. Then there's personality. Often, but not always, people take after their parents in terms of traits like cheerfulness or perfectionism and inclinations like leisure preferences or political leanings. So a good expression when we're talking about family similarities is this verb to take after. If you take after someone, it means you are similar to them, you resemble them. And it's typically used in families. For example, I take after my mother in our looks. I also take after her in our interest in classical music and art. Another good word here, traits, is simply another word for characteristics. So if you're looking for different ways of expressing the same word, think about words like traits, characteristics, qualities, and so on. Here I've tried to use some nice advanced personality characteristics or traits like cheerfulness, perfectionism. In addition to personality, I've mentioned preferences, your likes and dislikes, for example, for leisure or for politics. We'll move on to the next question. Do you think that daughters are always more similar to mothers than to male relatives? Or another way of putting it, do daughters always take after their mothers more than their fathers? I've said, I don't think it's always the case, meaning I don't think it's always true. But it certainly seems common. I think it's because the mother-daughter bond, the connection, the link, is one of the strongest in a family, and girls are strongly influenced by their mums when it comes to both character and tastes. They don't tend to see their fathers so much as role models. So if we're talking about similarities again, you might think about words like influence, both the noun influence and the verb influence, when you're talking about connections and similarities between family members. As always, be careful with your prepositions. In this case, we need influenced by someone. However, if you use it as a noun, the expression would be to have an influence on somebody. You might also want to use the word affect to talk about the impact of different family members on each other. Again, I've talked about the influence in terms of character, like personality, and tastes, meaning preferences. You can talk about tastes in music, tastes in food, even tastes in men or women. And finally, I've mentioned that for daughters, the fathers are not usually role models. Role model being someone that you look up to as an example of how you should behave. So moving on to our last question for part 3. In terms of personality, are people more influenced by their family or by their friends? In what ways? So again, we're still talking about influence. Influence affects relationships. I've said, I reckon family has the more pervasive and permanent influence. Now, before we move on, take a look at this expression. So I reckon is one way of expressing an opinion. It's a good idea to have a wide range of different ways to express your opinion, because you'll need to do it several times during the exam. So I reckon is one expression. You could also say I think, I believe, I suppose, in my opinion, and so on. So it's a good idea to build up a selection of these for use in the exam. So family has the more pervasive and permanent influence, so the deeper and longer lasting influence, because your friends are often transient parts of your life. So transient is temporary, short-lasting, whereas your family is a fairly permanent fixture. They're always there, always part of your life. Parents have the chance to mould their offspring's personalities throughout their formative years and beyond. So to mould a personality is to shape it, to form it, in the way that parents can educate their children and bring up their children in a certain way. Offspring is a good informal synonym for children. So parents can mould their offspring's personalities, while friends have relatively limited contact and only temporary effects. So in my opinion, your family has a constant influence throughout your childhood up to adolescence and beyond, whereas your friends tend to be more temporary. You don't spend as much time with them, so they have less influence in the end. Last line. So yes, I think family is more influential in this respect. So this is just quite a good short way to conclude your answer, especially if you feel you've spoken quite a lot. Maybe you've rambled a little, perhaps you've drifted off topic, or you haven't been quite focused. So if you need to refocus at the end of your talk, try a nice decisive phrase like, so yes, I think family is more influential in this respect. Another possibility could be, what I'm trying to say is family is more influential in this respect. Or basically, family is more influential in this respect. So there are good phrases you can use to refocus your answer and conclude clearly. This is very important because firstly, it helps the examiner know that you've finished your answer. Secondly, it helps conclude your answer neatly and logically. And thirdly, it helps the examiner know that you understood the main point of the question and you are able to answer it clearly. So that's the end of our short lesson today on family in IELTS speaking. Only one more thing to say, which is good luck with your exam.